We want to consider Samuel. And Samuel is an intriguing subject for me. I love Samuel. And my usual title for Samuel, if you were to do this over the length of a series that it takes to consider all of Samuel, I call him Israel's greatest reformer. And the reason is because he was. Okay, there are things that Samuel does which are absolutely remarkable. So I'll just go through a couple of these first. This is how many times Samuel is mentioned outside of the story of Samuel. And each one of those quotes, we haven't time to look at them today, each one of those quotes shows him in a remarkable light, incredible light. Psalm 99 talks about him as being equal with Moses and Aaron as a priest. And yet you might think, hang on a minute, he wasn't from the line of Aaron, so how could he be a priest? But God in his wisdom chose Samuel for a period of time where there was this transition needed. And this transition was going to take a particular type of man. And Samuel turned out to be that man. He's called in Acts 13 the first of all the prophets. All right? But I'm sure you probably can think of other prophets that came before Samuel. You know, Moses was a prophet. Miriam was a prophetess, for example. And yet Samuel's called the first of all the prophets. He's actually called a judge in the story. Okay? So there's this transition from the judges to the prophets. There's a transition on a number of levels. So there's a great list there. He's even mentioned in Hebrews 11. So that's his legacy. All right? So what are some of the things that you know about Samuel? He's a judge. Okay? He's a prophet. He's a priest. But that's not all. Look at this list. I dare you to find anyone else in Scripture who has this many responsibilities associated with them. Okay, you think of David, or you think of Abraham, or you think of Jeremiah. Samuel is phenomenal. Yes, he was a prophet, he was a priest, he was a judge. He was also a teacher. 1 Samuel 8 says, tell them the manner of the king. Go and teach them all the things a king would do. He was a scribe. He wrote out the constitution for the nation, and he also wrote out a history of the life of David. He was a mediator between God and the people. He was a visionary. He's the man that began the school of the prophets. And of course, they had their ups and downs, but they came to the fore in the days of Elijah and Elisha later on. That was Samuel that started that. He organized temple worship. This is a lovely verse, actually. You might have thought that David sat down and had the blueprints of the temple given to him and instructed his son Solomon what to do. 1 Chronicles 9 says that David did that with Samuel. It was Samuel that passed it on to David for that period of time. I'm guessing it was about 3 months that David spent with Samuel at the school of the prophets. If you have worked on it and have a more precise idea, I'd love to know. But it seems to me there was that small period of time when David and Samuel were together. He was a kingmaker on 2 occasions, and he was certainly a great mentor. First to Saul, gave up a lot of time for Saul. And then it all went down the plug hole, and he didn't really want to do anything again, and God sort of had to drag him down to anoint David. But then there was this mentoring with David. It's quite an incredible list, isn't it? And I don't think you'll find another Bible character that comes close to matching it out of all the characters that we know. So this comes at a crucial moment in history, I'm going to suggest. And it's a time period where there was a turning point needed, all right? A period of major change. And for me, looking at this, I would suggest that this is the greatest transition that was ever carried out in history up until the Lord Jesus Christ. Of course, that was the greatest transition, wasn't it? From law to grace. We know that. And of course, that necessitated a major change in thinking, a change in culture, a change in direction, a change in behavior. People needed to be re-educated. It needed patience and persistence to achieve that change. You think of Peter going through the transition, seeing the sheet come down and being told that there's a change needed in thinking. Paul, he needed to change his thinking. Well, there was a transition in history pointing forward to that took place in the days of Samuel. And the characters in the story of Samuel all have their characters repeated in the New Testament. It's quite remarkable. In fact, the book of Luke borrows all the language of the characters in 1 Samuel 1, 2, and 3 and gives a counterpart to all those characters in Luke 1 and 2. And good characters as well as bad characters. And we might be able to go into that a little bit later on. But this transition in Samuel's day was the precursor to that of the Lord. And obviously, if there was a change of mindset needed with the change from law to grace, well, there was a change of mindset needed back here in Samuel's day. And that's putting it mildly, actually. A monumental change was needed. Wholesale reformation was required because things had got so bad in Israel, both in its worship and its governance. So, how do we know how bad things were? Well, in that reading that we had, we would often go to the book of Judges and show just how bad things are in the book of Judges, because that's the time period that Samuel's found in. He's the last of the judges. And just a little note, some of you may have done some work on this. Who was the second to last judge before Samuel? Anyone know? Second to last judge. So Samuel's the last judge. Who's the second to last judge? Samson, right? And it takes a little while to think about that. And the reason is because we get these stories between Samson and Samuel. So Samson is in Judges 13, 14, 15, 16, isn't he? And that's really where the book of Judges should end. But we get these two additional stories attached to the end, just showing how bad things are. But they didn't happen at the end of Judges. Those two stories actually have their roots at the beginning of the book of Judges. So what we should really do is go from Judges 16 straight to 1 Samuel chapter 1. And I know some brethren have done some work on this. Brother Michael Ashton's book, Samuel, and Brother Roger Lewis, you might have heard some series on him. And independently, I was already doing my own work on this before hearing and reading about that, and came to the conclusion that I think Samuel and Samson are contemporaries. And in the type, they match up with John the Baptist and the Lord Jesus Christ. And we know that the Lord Jesus Christ and John the Baptist were born 6 months apart. And it wouldn't surprise me that that's how close Samson and Samuel were. I've got a chart at the end for anyone interested that shows all the workings out as far as I can see about how this time period works. Because in this time period, we get numbers put next to all the judges, all the kings. You know, we know how long Solomon reigned. We know how long David reigned. We know how long Saul reigned. We know how long the judges that came after Jephthah, how long Jephthah reigned, how long Ibsar and those sort of obscure ones. Okay, we know how long Samson was a judge for. The only one we don't know is Samuel. We don't have any particular time period put to Samuel. So putting all that together brought me to the conclusion that they were born around the time of Jephthah, similar time period to Jephthah. Samson and Samuel were born. All right, so that's just a bit of a aside. But have a look at chapter 1. We read, there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah. And he had 2 wives in verse 2. And then in verse 3, and this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And then it's sort of like, what do you need to know this part? Because it goes straight back to Elkanah in verse 4. It says, and the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. Why are you told that in the story? Nothing else is said about them. It's just sort of like inserted in. Well, I think they're the reason for the story of Samuel. Okay? And I'm going to make a bold assertion before I try and explain why. I believe the whole story of Samuel was Hannah wanting to replace the priesthood. All right? She wanted to replace these 2 boys. They are atrocious. They're some of the worst rogues in the Bible. Okay? Now, their story is not mentioned until chapter 2. Okay? So there's some sections in chapter 2 that give you the detail about how bad things really were and why this transition was needed and why this cultural change was needed. Okay? So let's just put their names up. All right? So the first guy, Hophni, his name means pugilist, all right? And I didn't know what a pugilist was. Does everybody know what a pugilist is? Okay? It's just a fancy word for a boxer, all right? So, Muhammad Ali's, all right? 2 fists, okay? He's a pugilist, all right? It's from the Hebrew shopen, which means 2 fists or 2 hands, okay? And he knew how to use them, this guy. This is the skill or practice of fighting with a fist. That's what pugilist is. So this guy's quite a bruiser, isn't he? He's got no qualms about punching you in the face. Or, if it's not his fist, wrapping his hands around your neck. Okay? Fists or hands. So he's the brawn. All right? What about Phinehas? Well, his name comes from 2 words. The Hebrew word pei, mouth, okay, and Nahash, which means the serpent. So the mouth of the serpent, that's Phinehas' name. Okay, so he uses his mouth. He's full of lies and deceit, crafty as anything. He's always scheming. So he's the brains. So the brains and the brawn of this corrupt priesthood are mentioned in these 2 boys here. All right? And they make the most awful corrupt pair ever to grace the pages of Scripture. And Hannah wanted them replaced. And she was going to raise Samuel to give him to God so that he could be the replacement. So this idea of wholly giving this boy to God is so that this boy would grow up knowing what it meant to give yourself to God. If your mother is prepared to give you up, you get this concept, you get this idea ingrained in you of what it means to dedicate yourself wholly to God, not to hold part of you back so that you can please parents or peers, okay? This mother, at the age of 3, I'm going to suggest, gave Samuel up so that Samuel could then give himself wholly to God. So you see how it starts with the mother? The mother gives the child wholly to God so that the child understands what it means to give yourself wholly to God. And she doesn't necessarily say to God, I want him to be the priest. She says, use him in whatever way you can to change this situation. And that's clearly how the text is structured in chapter 2. All right, so have you noticed that in chapter 2, now chapter 2 is a little bit longer and we're not going to spend as much time in chapter 2, but have you ever noticed that Samuel's mentioned 4 times in chapter 2, just a small little statement, just like a very brief comment? You'll see it in verse 11, the child did minister unto the Lord. You'll see it in verse 18, Samuel ministered before the Lord. Exactly the same statement, all right? Ministered. But then in verse 21, we get it again. The child grew before the Lord. And then verse 26, the child Samuel grew. So actually, that's a pattern. The child ministered, Samuel ministered. The child grew, Samuel grew. Okay? So it's deliberately being written like this. And in between the Samuel statements, okay, you get some Hophni and Phinehas statements. All right? So verse 12, so right hard on the heels of verse 11 about Samuel, you get, now the sons of Eli, the sons of Belial, they knew not the Lord. So you get a contrast between good Samuel and bad Hophni and Phinehas. But also down in verse 17, so hard on the heels of verse 18, okay, which is that good statement about Samuel, it says, wherefore the sin of the young man was very great before the Lord. So character statements of Samuel right alongside character statements of these two boys. And the same is in verse 22 and verse 25. All right? But more than that, in between the character statements of the bad boys, the Hophni and Phinehas, you get told exactly what they were doing. You get the behavior. So you get the character statement, then you get the behavior. And the behavior is atrocious. All right? I've just sort of summarized it here. In both of those sections, the key word is that they were abusers. All right? They were abusers. They were abusing the sacrifices by stealing God's portion. They were abusing the offerers by threatening them and saying, give up the meat, okay, or we will come down heavy on you. Our henchmen will beat you up, okay. And then in verse 22 to 25, they were abusing the women of the tabernacle, and then they gave their father lip, all right. They abused their father. They ignored their father. So can you see why Hannah hated going to the tabernacle? And why she wanted it to be changed, if this is the behavior that's going up there. This is not outsiders. This is insiders. This is the center of worship. This is God's representatives. Couldn't tolerate it. Okay? So this is why I'm going to suggest that Hannah, and we'll go through chapter 1 now, you'll see that Hannah gets awfully distressed every time she goes to the tabernacle and she sees this behavior. It just turns her insides out. She churns over this. So let's go back to chapter 1. So there was this certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, okay? Ramathaim Zophim, it means the heights, okay? And it's probably situated between two hills. And Zophim means to watch, okay? So there's these two hills, okay? And of course, that's what you do on a hill. You go up to watch, go up to look, but it's repeated, okay? It's plural. So hence, to watch from the heights. And you'll see through the story that that's what Samuel elevates to. He's going to watch the nation from the heights. God's going to raise him up to be the one to look after the nation and to try and rescue it from this disastrous situation. All right? And it's interesting that Ramah, as it became known, shortened it down. Ramathaim Zophim's the long name, but everywhere else it's just generally used as Ramah. That became Samuel's known home, okay? It's his birthplace, it's his primary residence, and it ends up being his burial. This was going to be his role, watch from the heights, all right? Now, this man, Elkanah, okay, the son of Jeroam, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, and Ephrathite. Now, you might read that and think, he's from the tribe of Ephraim, all right, because he's an Ephrathite. Don't make the mistake of assuming that. We're quite clearly told, and I don't have this on a slide, but we're quite clearly told in 1 Chronicles 6, verse 27 and 33 to 38, that he's described as a Levite, all right? So Ephraim is just the territory where he's living. His actual descendancy is in the line of Korah. He's a Korite, all right? And of course, what do you know about the Korites? Well, they're quite famous, aren't they? As being the watchers of the nation, the doorkeepers of the nation. Once they saw their father and what he did, they stepped aside and said, we don't want to associate ourselves with what Dad's doing, okay? Setting up a new tabernacle over there and trying to steal the priesthood. We're going to set apart from that. And so the sons of Korah became famous as the watchers of the nation, watchers of the doorkeepers, the porters, okay? And it's interesting. How interesting is this? Who became their sort of mentor associated with the sons of Korah? Who became their, I was going to sort of say mascot, but it's not really mascot. It's sort of like an emblem, an individual that became their chief proponent. Anyone know? Another Phineas. How interesting is that? All right. You actually have in this story the first Phineas and you have the second Phineas. Now, I think I've left that slide out because I've had to juggle some slides around. But if you want to see the two Phineases, all right, they are opposites in every way. Quite remarkable. First Phineas, second Phineas. It's interesting, you know, why did Eli name his son Phineas? Probably because he wanted him to copy the first Phineas. But how opposite did he turn out? It's really quite remarkable. And in actual fact, the sons of Korah, okay, stood against their father, who was he was an outsider, he wasn't of the line of Aaron, trying to corrupt the priesthood. He was trying to steal the priesthood. Now you have Elkanah and his son Samuel, who's not of the line of the line of Aaron, okay, who is of the line of Aaron. Did you know that? Samuel is of the line of Aaron. Is he of the line of Aaron? I'm missing my slide here and getting myself jumbled up. Let me just check my notes here. This time not. So Korah was an imposter, wasn't he? He was an imposter trying to steal the priesthood, all right, because he was a son of Korah. He was not a son of Aaron, all right? But from within the very line of the priests, from among their ranks, corruption had been allowed to set in. So that pure line from Aaron had now become corrupt, okay? So whereas before the corruption was trying to come from outside, now the corruption is inside. And God's going to take a son of Korah to change the priesthood. So it's the opposite. A son of Korah tried to steal it in the first place. Now a son of Korah is going to try and heal it or replace it. And God's going to endorse it on this occasion. So, this man Elkanah, okay, went up every year, and it says that he had 2 wives. 2 wives. That's not unusual in the Bible, is it? We know that. But 2 wives. Now, we often have a lot said about these 2 wives, and their names mean this. Hannah means grace or favour. And I'm going to suggest she was the favourite. She's probably the first of the 2 wives. Okay? Grace or favour. But Peninnah, she also was a treasured pearl in her own right. Her name means pearl. Okay? So she was favoured even above, Hannah though, was favoured even above the treasured pearl. But Peninnah had something that Hannah didn't. And that, of course, is that Peninnah had children. And she had quite a lot, all right? Quite a lot of children. Verse 4 says, her sons and her daughters. So there's at least 4, maybe more. So she's got quite a few children. But verse 4 says, Verse 5 says, but unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. She had no children. She was barren. And the reason she was barren was because God had shut up her womb. She was unable to have children. And to not have children in those days was kind of stigma, wasn't it? Now, the reason that she couldn't have children may have been the reason why Elkanah went and had another wife, and Peninnah was able to bear children. And so this family went up every year, it says in verse 3, to a place called Shiloh. Shiloh. They went up to sacrifice. Just look at the word sacrifice first of all. The Hebrew word is zobak. Okay, so of all the sacrifices that you know, this is probably referring to the thanksgiving offering, the peace offering. You know how there were 5 basic altar offerings? Of those 5, the word zabak there is used predominantly for those sacrifices that the offerer could partake in, where you could eat and share in it. And so they were the peace offerings. And of course, there were 3 categories of peace offering. There was just this thanksgiving offering that was offered just as an act of spontaneity. There was a vow offering, and then there was a voluntary offering. Leviticus chapter 3 and 7 describe those 3 offerings. Okay, so up they came. And of course, Hophni and Phinehas tried to steal that meat when you sat down to eat that food. You're just about to start eating the meal, and they would come up and they would steal it. And they would say, well, just at least wait until we've offered the best part to God. And say, no, give it now or we'll beat you up. All right? So that's where we get the idea that these are the peace offerings. The word sacrifice there is zobak. But they were going up to Shiloh. And Shiloh is really the idea of tranquility, of peace. All right? Shalah. You can build shalom out of that. All right? As well. It's a connected word, Shiloh. To be tranquil, to be at ease, to be at rest. But it was anything but restful going up there. It was tense. You were walking on eggshells with those rogue priests and their henchmen going around intimidating and bullying people. And it was awfully frightening. And I can well assume that many chose not to go 3 times a year for that very reason. Going once was hard enough. And sometimes maybe not even once a year, because you never knew what treatment you were going to get. It was supposed to be a sanctuary of rest, a place to escape pressures and stresses of life. But actually, the very opposite happened every time you went up. So, what we read in verse 5 is that Hannah is introduced. Hannah's given a worthy portion, okay, because she's the favoured wife. For he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb, and her adversary also provoked her sore. So this is interesting. So I don't know if you've done some work on this word adversary, okay, but it's not your usual word for adversary. All right, so anyone know what the usual word for adversary is in the Bible? All the first principles teaching you about Satan. Okay, Satan is the Hebrew word for adversary, and it's always referring to a person. This is not that word. This is the word Zara. Okay, and Zara is never used of a person in the Bible except here. So I'm going to suggest it actually shouldn't be referring to a person even here. The context, as I hope to show, will show that actually her adversary should be translated as her adversity, because this is what this word here is. Her adversity is the word which means distress or straits, and it's translated elsewhere as trouble, anguish, or tribulation. And her tribulation provoked her sore. She had a problem. Something was distressing her. It wasn't a person as such, all right? Her adversary also provoked her sore. Now, see if I've got this here. Yeah. Provoked. The word provoked here means to be angry, all right? So the margin says this distress angered her. You'll see the word anger is actually in the margin. Not only that, it provoked her sore for to make her fret. So the word anger is used twice, so you can feel the tension that she's displaying here. She gets really uptight, burnt up with anger inside. And then she's angry because she's fretting. And this word fret means to thunder or roar. So inside she is raging. She's roaring. The word is used later on in chapter 2 to talk about literal thunder. And Samuel talks about thunder in chapter 7, same word. Okay? So she's got this intense anger that's troubling her. Okay? It's from the Hebrew word to tumble, to be agitated. All right? So in Australia, we have a lot of top-loader washing machines. All right? Not like your front loader, because we can put them in another room, in a utility room. We don't have to put it in the kitchen. And inside those washing machines, we have what's called an agitator. All right? It twists back and forth. And so this is what she's got inside her. She's got this agitator. She's agitated. It's just rocking her every time she goes up. Because that's what verse 7 says. Because the Lord had shut up her womb at the end of verse 6. So she's really quite cross because she's got no way to remedy this problem. Her womb is barren. So you're starting to see that there's a connection between the trouble that she's seeing and feeling and the fact that she can't have children. Because verse 7 says, and as he did so, year by year, and then look at the margin for the next bit. When she went up to the house of the Lord, it says from the time that she went up to the house of the Lord, so, and the word she should not be there. It should be neuter, should be, so it provoked her, therefore she wept and did not eat. So this distress, this agitation started the moment she left home about to go up to the tabernacle. And it just got worse and worse as she went up there. And inside was raging. And every time she got there, she was an emotional wreck and she couldn't eat. It really distressed her that she just stopped eating. Okay? It was a time of celebration. It was a time when you should be giving thanksgiving. Peace offerings were there to be shared with God himself. And she couldn't. She couldn't eat. Now, I do know that often it's suggested that it's Peninnah that's causing the agitation and that she's rubbing it in on Hannah. Ha ha ha, you don't have any children. I've got all the children. And there was this rivalry, this jealousy. I'm going to suggest that takes away from everything Hannah does in this story. That really takes away this woman's faith. She is the one that instigates the change needed in the nation. She streets ahead of the two great men in her life, her husband and her high priest. Streets ahead of both of them. Okay? And she is being troubled by the two boys at the priesthood, at the tabernacle. And she really wished that they could be replaced and could be changed. And of course, but she can't help. She has got no children. She's got no way of being able to implement a change. God's shut up her womb. Okay, and that's distressing Hannah. And of course, year on year on year it goes. So it's interesting that Peninnah's not mentioned after verse 4, is she? She's only in the record to show that the problem of fertility did not lie with Elkanah, it lay with Hannah. Okay? And she drops out of the story. And I think to talk about Hannah having a rivalry with Peninnah is to really do a disservice to Hannah. Okay? She's much, much more spiritual than that. And it took me a little while to see that. But when you see what she does here and how God endorses everything that she does, there's no way that Hannah would stoop to that level. She's got her mind on much higher things. And so she refuses to eat. And so she ached at the distress that Hophni and Phinehas were causing the nation, but she also ached that God was denying her an opportunity to try and help remedy it. And she saw that Israel's need for a deliverer was greater than her need for a son. That's how she views things. All right. Now, Elkanah, bless him. All right. Lovely Elkanah. He's a lovely man. Okay. But he doesn't get it, does he? He says, why is what his answer is. Verse 8. Why weepest thou? Why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? And then he says this, am I not better to thee than 10 sons? Oh, no, you're not actually, Elkanah. I mean, he's a little bit over-egging himself because in Ruth chapter 4, just before, the women in the story of Ruth says that this is better than 7 sons. All right? The one daughter, daughter Ruth, that was part of Naomi's family now, was better than 7 sons. But here's Elkanah saying, am I not better than 10 sons? He's trying his best, isn't he? He really is. He's trying his best. But he's not there with Hannah. All right? So verse 9, it says, so Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they drunk. And the word rose up means that she stood. All right? She stood up. Something triggered her this occasion. All right? Just bear that in mind. Something triggered her this occasion. She stood up. And the second half of the verse says, now Eli the priest sat. So isn't that ironic, right? That's telling you something in the story, that this is the story of 2 parents, Hannah and Eli. She stood. He continued to sit. All right? See that in the end of it? Now Eli the priest sat on a seat by the post of the temple. She did not eat. The whole story of Eli is that he ate too much. All right? He's a big fella. Okay? He could barely get up. All right? It's huge. She gave up her son to God. He gave up on his sons. Okay? Regarding God. So she sacrificed herself for the benefit of her son. He sacrificed his sons for the benefit of himself. What type of parent are you? Here they are. 2 types of parents, okay? The devoted mother and the defective father. I just think that's quite interesting because when it says rose up, change that, put stood. That's what it means. She stood up, but he continued to sit. All right? And the word seat there is the word throne, okay? And in the tabernacle, there was only meant to be one seat, the mercy seat. Eli had introduced another. All right? He'd introduced another seat. And he was sitting on a seat by the door of the tabernacle. All right? So isn't that interesting? That's just quite remarkable. What type of parent are you? All right? And we live in similar times to Hophni and Phinehas, don't we? Like abusers out there. It's remarkable that we live in the Me Too environment and all of that's going on. What type of parent are we? All right? So she was in bitterness of soul. She prayed unto the Lord and wept sore, and she vowed a vow. Okay? Now, I thought I had this one on a slide, but I don't. So I'll just describe it. In this vow, it becomes pretty clear of what she is really wanting for the nation. Okay? And I've already told you what I think it is. I think the proof of that comes out here. What did she want? She wanted to replace the priesthood because of how bad Hophni, it caused her distress and agitation. She thought, this can't go on. We need to replace the priesthood. So in this vow, there are 3 things that give you an indication of what she wants. Okay? And there's one more in the next chapter that highlights and cements this. All right? So, how do we know she wanted to replace the priesthood? Well, all of the actions mentioned here in verse 11 relate to her desire to have a child that would grow up to be a priest. All right, so here's the first one. Now, if you're barren and you wanted children, would you be so audacious to come to God with a vow saying you only want a male child? All right. Oh, yeah, I want children, but it has to be a male. I think that's pretty audacious. Look what she says. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child. All right? Now that's sort of making God do something beyond your actual needs, because you need a child because you're barren, but do you need to have a specific gender? Well, she does, because she's after a priest, isn't she? So females couldn't be priests, but males could. So that's number one, all right? It's a bit rich to crave children and then demand you only want a male, but she's after a priest, someone that God could use. And then it says, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life. Okay? What's that language of, do you think? All right. Of all the offerings under the law, which one was the one offering where God got the lot? And the offerer got none, the priest got none, the officiating priest, no one else got anything. Only one offering under the law was where God got the lot. It was the burnt offering. All right. So we called our study today, wholly given unto God. Leviticus 8 talks about being wholly given unto God. It talks about the Levites being whole, but they were the burnt offering for the nation. Okay? And Samuel was from the tribe of Levi. He's taking this sentiment of the burnt offering. Okay? And in, sorry, did I say Leviticus 8? Numbers 8, it's the Levites. In Leviticus 8, it's the priests, the family of Aaron, that had to give themselves as a burnt offering to God. Okay? And then the final one, at the end of verse 11, there shall no razor come upon his head. And of course, that's the language of a Nazirite. And a Nazirite was anybody who, for a period of time, could act like the high priest. All right? They were not to eat or they were not to drink strong drink. They were not to touch a dead body, and they were to have no razor to their hair. Okay, all those three things related to the high priest. And you could act like the high priest, even though you weren't of the tribe of Levi or the family of Aaron. You could act like the high priest for a period of a vow, the Nazirite vow. And Hannah is saying, I want my son to act like a high priest. So I will teach him how to be a high priest. So three things, all relating to the priesthood. And then, although it's not mentioned here, it says in the next chapter that every year she brought a little coat. And we often had the sort of lovely idea that it was to keep him warm at night because, as he grew up, he needed on the cold nights to have this beautiful coat reaching down to his ankles to just rug him up. That's not what that coat is, because she brought it and she took it home on every occasion. I won't go there now, but have a look. She brought it, and for that period of time, she dressed him in that coat, okay? And the coat there, the word there, is the coat used of the priest. And she dressed up her little Samuel and said, this is your role. You're going to act like a priest. And then she would take it home. And next year she would bring it up and dress him up again and instructed him on those occasions when she came up. Okay, so 4 things, I think, that show how she was wanting to replace the priesthood. Now, all right, we're sort of, I'm not sure what time expectancy there is on this, but we know that Eli thinks she's drunk, of course, and then finds out remarkably that she's not, and that she's made a vow of all things. And Eli says, may God bless you. Okay? And it's the only positive thing he says in the whole story. Eli says, and to me it's quite remarkable that anything positive was said by Eli, but there is just that one, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. I wanted to just get to this one here, okay? Because They go home in verse 19. They rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord and returned and came to the house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived that she bare a son and called his name Samuel. And then it says in verse 21, the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer unto the Lord yearly sacrifice and his vow. So there are two vows in this chapter, his vow and her vow. And I'm going to suggest that his vow is actually her vow. He takes on her vow. And under the law, he was allowed to do that. He could have stopped her vow. There's a chapter in the law that says that if a man hears his wife's vow and he thinks it's crazy, he's allowed to relinquish her from that vow. Okay? Now, you imagine you're going home, Elkanah and Hannah. I saw you talking up at the tabernacle. Yeah, I was talking to the high priest about it. But what made you go up there? Well, actually, I made a vow. You made a vow. Okay, what was the vow? Well, I promised God that if I have a child at any stage, I will raise him, and as soon as he's weaned, I will give him to the priesthood. What? You mean Eli? Yeah, I'll give him to Eli. Can you imagine what Elkanah was thinking? That big bloke, he can barely get off his chair. He only has to sneeze and the ground shakes. All right, he could sit on the baby and you'd never see the baby again. It's ridiculous. All right. What do you think convinced Elkanah that this was a vow worth taking on? Well, the timings make it work out. And as I said, I've got the chart that Samuel was born around the same time or just after Jephthah. And of course, we know the story of Jephthah, that there was a woman, Jephthah's daughter, that went to the tabernacle and lived out the rest of her lives at the tabernacle. And I can well imagine Hannah saying, well, actually, I was talking to someone, a faithful woman, and her father made a vow, and everyone thought it was a crazy vow. It was a rash vow, all right? But I said, no, Dad, it's okay. I will honour that vow. I will do what that vow suggests. I will go up to the tabernacle, okay? And I believe, Elkanah, that if we did have a child and we did have to bring him to the tabernacle, he'll be in good hands, really good hands. Have you ever seen this before? There are only two vows about children in the Bible, and they right hard alongside each other. Jephthah's rash and unthoughtful vow, but his daughter considered it. She really did consider it. She went for 2 months bewailing her virginity, and she considered it. She understood the principle of the burnt offering, all right, about giving yourself wholly to God. It involved dedicating his only daughter. He didn't have any other children, all right? His daughter would never have children again if she went up and became a virgin at the tabernacle. Hannah's vow seemed rash and unthoughtful to everyone else. Elkanah would have thought it was a ridiculous idea, but she had diligently considered it. It says in the verse, in my musings, in my complaint, verse 16, that word complaint is the word musings. In my diligent musings and meditations, I've considered this seriously, okay? She understood the principle of the burnt offering, didn't she? It involved dedicating her only son, and she was quite happy if she never had children again. And I just think it's a wonderful thought. We'll finish it for this session. I think it's a wonderful thought that Jephthah's daughter, who thought she'd never have children again, God, by his grace, allowed her to be there in preparation for the child that would change the nation. And she was able to raise a child and honour God in so doing. So let's leave it there. You might have different ideas, and that's fine. I'm not dogmatic about this, but it just seems to fit in the story if you see how Samson and Samuel actually are back to back. But we'll look at that in the next session.
If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.